The Sports Desk at the Columbus Dispatch presents the BuckeyeXtra Basketball Podcast. With your host, Ohio State basketball beat writer Adam Jardy.
Brady Batiste, get me the rock. Here it goes. Up and away. Slam jam bam. And now he does a little dance.
Now, the BuckeyeXtra Basketball Podcast.
Hello, everyone. This is Adam Jardy from the Columbus Dispatch. Today is Friday, October 3rd, 2025, and it's my official duty to welcome you into episode 498 of the BuckeyeXtra Men's Basketball Podcast. Welcome to Jubilation City. Welcome to new Taylor Swift album day. That's right. I'm dressed in my Life of a Showgirl outfit, but since this is audio only, you're just going to have to imagine. All right, once you're done throwing up, let's turn our attention back here to the Ohio State men's basketball team, where 2 days ago the Buckeyes held media day inside the practice facility at the Jerome Schottenstein Center, and it was busy. There was a lot to break down that I'm honestly still very much in the process of going through. Was able to spend time with, let's see, who all did I talk to? Matthew Grichich, Josh Ojianwuna, Colin White, Amari Bynum, Gabe Cupps. I think that's every. Boy, it all runs together. There was a lot. Bruce Thornton, and then we had a roughly 40-minute press conference with Jake Diebler, and we covered a lot of ground. There's a lot of things to talk about here. I wanted to get this podcast out to you sooner, but there's just it takes a minute to process everything. And honestly, I'm still, like I said, I'm still in the midst of doing that. So there will be lots more here in the next several days coming out of this. And then next week is Big Ten Men's Basketball Media Day. So I'll be in Chicago. Women's Day is Wednesday, and then the men's is Thursday. Ohio State being represented there by obviously Jake Diebler. And the Buckeyes are bringing 4 players: Bruce Thornton, John Mobley, Devin Royal, and Christoph Tilley. So a little bit like behind the scenes, like I kind of geared what I was looking to accomplish at Ohio State Media Day based on knowing that I will be speaking to those 4 very much key players next week in Chicago for longer periods of time. So try to be a little selective and plan out who I was going to spend time with. It always goes by very quickly. Ended up about 40 minutes or so of interview time before we then went and had our press conference with Jake Diebler. So I will have essentially stories on all those guys here in the not too distant future. And like I said, would have had this podcast to you. I was hoping for Wednesday night or Thursday, but just it takes a lot to really kind of start digesting all this stuff. And also came down with pretty nasty migraine on Thursday, so that kind of pushed everything back a little bit. But I'm going to be, like I said, writing a lot of stories here in the coming days. But I got a couple of just off-the-top takeaways that I wanted to get into and get this out to you before the weekend, and then before next week, which will escalate rather quickly. It's going to be a lot. We're officially in that time of year. With it being Friday, we're 4 weeks and 3 days from the first game of the season. I guess that would add up to 31. And yeah, things are happening, and there's a lot to talk about. So great time to be listening to the podcast. I appreciate you. I want to remind everyone that they can subscribe to the podcast on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you enjoy your favorite podcasts. If you do subscribe, you'll automatically get the newest ones just as soon as, in this case, our guy Scott Kirk able to grab them and publish them for you. While you're subscribing or downloading, please leave a review. Please click 5 stars. And as always, please consider telling a friend. Thanks to everyone who's taken the time to do all those things. And thanks again to Scott Kirk for pitching in here and picking up the slack for Patrick Flaherty, who thinks that basketball preseason is a good time to take vacation time. Come on, Podfather. All right. So, like I said, I got a couple of bullet points here I'm going to run down. A couple of things that I thought were interesting, a couple of things that we learned. And first thing is that when I spoke with Josh Ojianwuna, there's not really a timeline yet. He's making progress. He's able to do more than he was able to do, obviously, a couple weeks ago or a couple months ago. Josh, coming back from a torn ACL, suffered at Baylor last season. His situation moving forward is going to be really interesting because when he's able to start doing more basketball things and when he's ultimately cleared to play, those kinds of things, depending on when they are, nothing's been ruled out yet as far as like, could he redshirt? Could you see him at Ohio State next year? I mean, I would expect that if he were to not be able medically to play this season and look ahead to next season, that would be at Ohio State. I think that's probably a fair assumption at this moment. But we don't know yet if he's going to be able to play this season, and we'll get more information as this thing moves along and as we get in further into the preseason, certainly the start of the season. If he's not back on the court, at a certain point, you would start to say, okay, well, is it worth playing, whatever number of games and burning an eligibility year? Does the NCAA approve a 5th year of eligibility? How could that change things? I mean, I would imagine in that scenario that if we are talking about players getting a 5th year, and if he's available for the final 13 games of the season, maybe that means he plays. Like there's a lot of interesting variables here, but I had a really enjoyable conversation with him. You can see I all my interviews that I did, I filmed, and those are on dispatch.com. There's a basketball interview playlist that you can watch. It's at the top of all the stories that I write. So if you want to go watch 6 minutes of me talking to Josh, it's up there for you. I just haven't gotten around to writing that story yet, but enjoyed getting to talk to him. And we even broke down, like, he had a couple different bracelets on his wrist, like that had some interesting stories behind them. So we talked about that. Go check that out. It was a good time, good conversation with Josh. So, and then moving down the line, had a good conversation with Colin White and talked to him about what had happened to him injury wise. We went through last season and how he was injured and how he was re-injured and what the offseason has been like. It's unfortunate he's still not 100%. And I do think as we are here in October and you look at a player who, as I talked about with Colin, he had to work his butt off to earn an Ohio State offer. Like, that was a big deal. And it took a lot for him to get to that level to where Ohio State offered him a scholarship. And to go through like that process and get to Ohio State and to carve out, a role. He didn't play early. He didn't play against Texas. He didn't play against Texas A&M, but he found his way into Diebler's rotation, and then he gets hurt and battles his way back from that, gets hurt again, ends up having a surgery in the off season. It's been a tough go in the early stages of Colin White's career at Ohio State, and to the point where he's not 100% fully available at this point in the preseason is what he told me. And so when I get to my preseason power rankings, which will kick off here, before too much longer, he's going to be lower on that list than his, I think, ability would reflect, because he has missed a lot of time. And certainly that doesn't mean he can't make up for it, and that doesn't mean that he can't find his way into things this season. I do think they're going to try to rotate guys because they do feel like there's more depth on this team. But I think I've mentally adjusted my expectations for sophomore year Colin White, because he's basically not had an off season, and that's unfortunate for him. And that's a spot where there could be some minutes as Ohio State still figures out kind of what this is going to look like and how much obviously Devin Royal is going to play the 3, but does he slide to the 4 at times? Who plays the 3 when he does? Does Ohio State need Colin's size? Like, can they go 3 guards? There's some interesting pull and push going on, I think, there. And if Colin's able to get healthy before much longer, could certainly be a name to monitor there in that rotation, whatever that ultimately looks like. So the first guy that I spoke with was Matthew Grujic, and I've talked to him a couple of times, just kind of here and there. We've crossed paths, but this was like the first real kind of interview, and we talked about his journey to Ohio State, and we talked about the summer and the acclimation process, and it was just really interesting to get some of his early impressions on what this has been like and why this is the right step in his career. And one of the things that really stuck out with me as being particularly interesting was that he spoke about the speed that they play with and how that's been a bit of an adjustment for him. And now, he's played in other countries where speed has been, heavily emphasized, but that this has been a bit of an adjustment for him. And he's a guy that I think he's probably the biggest unknown, the biggest, like, I don't know what the ceiling or the floor looks like for his freshman year, because if you told me that, he is in the top 8 in the rotation and gives them a couple points a game and whatever, like, I would believe that. If you told me that he is like a prolific scorer who is someone they have to find ways to keep on the court, I would believe that as well. I mean, he's got size and he's got certainly scoring ability. He's proven it at all the youth national team levels. It's just going to be interesting to see how that now translates as he gets a little bit more settled, as he gets more comfortable with Ohio State. Jake Diebler was asked about him, and he said the game's slowly starting to slow down for him. The pace we're playing at is different. And he said the first day of practice is really fast for him. He said, I've been really impressed with how much he's improved in understanding what we're doing, limiting some of those turnovers he had in the early days of practice, and becoming more efficient. And he said, like, he's got to remind himself that, he was around, but he couldn't practice during the summer. And then he missed time when he was with the national team. So he said, but he did say he's got to remind himself of that, but that he, quote, I'm really impressed with the progress he's made. So definitely going to be another really interesting name to keep an eye on as they move through the preseason here. You can watch that video interview as well on our webpage. Good conversation. Good to start getting to know him a little bit. Talk to Bruce Thornton for a few minutes because, like I said, even though we'll be getting him at Big Ten Media Day next week and there will be more time to kind of sit down and go over things, he's a 4-year starter, going to be a 4-year captain, like all those things. Like you talk to Bruce Thornton at Media Day for sure. He seemed a little different. He seemed, I don't want to say like there's you if you say someone seems a little bit more at ease, I think there's certainly an implication that means like less, you can be more at ease but still have like an edge. And I think that was one of the prevailing vibes that I got from talking to Bruce, was like things seem different for him and things seem more I can't think of the right word that I want here. There's a sense of urgency, but also a sense of understanding and a sense of like, maybe not understanding, but just like belief that like, this is going to be fine. This is going to work. Cracking smiles, like sounds like there's been a lot of trash talking in practice. And like Bruce has been very much a part of that. Talk about like having to pull guys away from each other because they're so like intense and at each other. Like there's much more, like this leads into one of the other things I was talking about, but just that like there is a lot of conversation, or there was a lot of conversation about like how much more intense practices have been and how much more in your face this team can get without like people worrying about, egos and hurting feelings and things like that. So it was that was a vibe for sure from talking to guys that came out of interviews. Just like this team, there's a lot more from a competitiveness and a feistiness in practice. That was one of the things I heard at like when they had the alumni dinner during the preseason, that like Scooney Penn really impressed upon this year's team, that like how much that Final Four team like got after each other and how much they, attacked each other, and that tenacity really helped get that team to where it needed to be. Wonder if we're going to see some of that in this year's team, because I think that would go against some of the criticisms that we've seen of Ohio State the last couple of years. One random little nugget that I always get to my team voted superlatives as we move through the preseason. There is at this moment a clear-cut favorite emerging for the best dunker on this year's team. I'll let you speculate who that might be, but I think it's kind of obvious based on some of the things we've already talked about. Another guy who was a pretty big talking point was Christoph Tilly, and what impact he's already had on how this team sees itself playing and where the ceiling might be and how things are going to fit. I'm not sure that it can be overstated at this point, like how critical he is to how this team wants to be and how much they believe his skill set is going to be able to impact this team and make a big difference in what Ohio State looks like this year. So it's going to be a lot to write about and talk about with him in these next coming days and weeks. I didn't speak to him other than just to say hello because, like I said, we'll get him on Wednesday. So more on him Thursday, Big Ten Media Day. So more on him as we move through the week. Another thing that I thought was interesting, and this came from Jake Diebler's press conference, and listening to like Bruce Thornton's interview, I think that the expectation among those of us who cover the team, and certainly those of you who are listening to this podcast and who buy a ticket to a game or, care about the program, care about these players, like are invested in Ohio State basketball. I think the general unspoken, or I guess maybe not even unspoken, expectation for an acceptable result to the season is get to the tournament. Obviously it's been 3 years. We know it's been since 2012, 2013 that Ohio State has won any sort of trophy of note and has made a deep NCAA tournament run, gotten past the first weekend. And there is a growing level of frustration, certainly among the fan base, that at some points is seeping into apathy of like, when is this program going to figure it out? And when is the program going to get to these things? And when you look at missing the tournament for 3 straight years, I think that the bar for the year, it would be fair to say, is like, get in the tournament, play in March Madness, be on that stage, and then build, from there. And in the conversations with Bruce, because he's talked about it during the summer when we've had interviews with him, he certainly talked about it on Wednesday. Like, you would think like, okay, back for a 4th year, it's NCAA tournament or bust. Like that's clearly the thing that his resume needs. Like for him, statistically, he's going to go down as one of the most prolific all-around players in Ohio State history. But if this team doesn't win enough to get in the tournament, I think that is going to hold back where he sits in the pantheon at Ohio State. I think that will be the knock on his resume. But if you talk to Bruce, it's not I came back because we have to make the tournament. I'm thinking about making the tournament every day. That's the number one goal. Like, that is a goal, and that is certainly important to him, and I do believe that is driving him. But that's not the be-all, end-all. That's why he's back. That's like, I've been interested in that because I don't know if focusing on making the NCAA tournament every day in June or September or October, I don't know if that's the best way to approach it. There's probably something to be said for like, you could wear yourself out, you get worn down, you make it too big of a monster, whatever. But the bar, at the same time, the bar is not make the tournament for this team. Like, Jake Diebler was asked quite a bit about the NCAA tournament, and some of the players were asked about making the tournament. And like, while that is the goal, they've been pretty clear that that's not the only goal, and that they don't just want to make the tournament, they want to go far in the tournament. So here's what Jake Diebler said about, is the NCAA tournament the goal? And he pointed to the back wall. He said, you can see what the standard is, in my opinion, of where this program should be. And the back wall, it pointed out championships and Big Ten titles and NCAA tournament runs and Final Fours. And he said how, he said, this is the interesting quote to me. Disappointed with how we finished last season for sure. But we don't go into this season just setting a lower bar because maybe the program hasn't been there. To me, the bar for this program should always be at the very top. He said, "We've made a ton of progress. We're shooting for the moon. That's how we operate every single day." He said, "It's not something we talk about every single day, but our guys know that. I'm not going to lower the bar where I want this program to be because we didn't get the result we wanted. We're going to fight, scratch, claw, get this program back to that level, however long it takes." He did say he didn't really watch the NCAA tournament. Bruce Thornton said he didn't watch the NCAA tournament. Like, that kind of stuff really stuck with them. That, like, they didn't make it. Certainly it's fueling them, but it's not a NCAA tournament or bust situation for this team. They want to go far, and they're not just setting the bar at getting in. There's going to be a lot to talk about there in that regard, but that was one of the more interesting. It's an interesting dynamic to me as this team moves into the season. And the last thing that I want to get into in this episode, without stretching it far too long, is one of the things that Diebler was asked was basically just a straight up question. Like, I hear from fans all the time, why should this team be better? Like, why should I think that this team will be better? So in general, like, what's your response? And I thought what transpired next was like a 3-minute sort of post-mortem rather of what went wrong last year and why they think it will be better this year. And I wrote this story. It's already up at dispatch.com. It went up Friday morning. Basically, there were 3 main statistical categories that Diebler highlighted. And some of these numbers were really interesting to me. Like, first off, he highlighted, and we talked about this at the time, this was a concern when the season began last year, rebounding. Because this team was not big enough to effectively attack the rim at either end of the court in the Big Ten last season. I remember at Media Day asking, like, Aaron Bradshaw's like 7'1", 215. Like, can he handle battling in the Big Ten? Answer was no, he could not. Behind Aaron Bradshaw was Sean Stewart. And so you're playing a 6'8" player at center, a 6'6" power forward, and Devin Royal. Like, this team did not have enough size to do what it needed to do to rebound effectively last year. And so Diebler obviously highlighted that and how this year's team will be bigger. It's why I do think, I don't know how much 3-guard lineup we'll see with Thornton, Mobley, and Cups on the floor together, because I think you're talking about Mobley's 6'1", Bruce is 6'2", Cups is 6'2". So when you look at the size of this year's team, and starting at Christoph Tilley, 7 foot 240, Ivan Yagovin, 7'1", 250. I think he can handle a consistent role this year in a way that he couldn't last year. He's not going to be a top 8, top 9, maybe even top 10 minutes guy, but like, he's a more equipped big body that you can use as opposed to last season. But Brandon Knoll, 6'8", 240. You've still got Devin Royal at the 3. Amari Bynum, 6'8", 220. Like, you've got more size than you did last year. And you start looking at some of the defense or some of the rebounding numbers for Ohio State. I didn't quite realize until you start adding all these things up, but like, Ohio State was 224th in offense or in defensive rebounding. Like, a lot, like, opponents grabbed so many offensive rebounds to make Ohio State 224th in that category. Ohio State was 212th in offensive rebounding, 11th best in the Big Ten at offensive rebounding, 4th worst in offensive rebounds allowed. The offensive rebounding rate was Ohio State's worst since 2018-19. Defensive rebounding rate was worse since 2014-15. Ohio State allowed more or the same number of second chance points as it scored in 19 games and went 8-11 in those games. So you had that problem. That was one of the highlights. This team has to rebound better. They think this team will rebound better. As we saw play out so often last season, the lack of size significantly impacted Ohio State's foul rate. How many times was Sean Stewart in foul trouble? How many times did Ohio State have to commit a foul to stop a drive? How many times was somebody in foul? Like, it was a parade to the free throw line for large stretches of the season. And you start looking at some of these numbers, like maybe some of, like, I know we talked about it at the time, but Ohio State was 331st nationally last year in keeping opponents from the free throw line. And teams got 23.6% of their scoring against Ohio State from free throws. That was the 13th highest number in the country. Sean Stewart's average of 7.5 fouls per 40 minutes was the highest for an Ohio State rotation player since Radinovich, had 8.5 fouls per 40 minutes in 2001-02. Bradshaw was at 6.2 fouls per 40 minutes, and he played almost 200 fewer minutes. Those guys fouled way too much. You can go across the board. I mean, like, Quez Glover had an off-the-charts foul rate per 40 minutes given how much he played. Devin Royal actually got better than he had as a freshman or a sophomore. As a sophomore, he got better than he had been as a freshman. Like, this team fouled too much from a combination of undersized, inexperienced, and in some cases just poor basketball decisions. And one of the things that Diebler talked about at length was like, we'll have to see this stuff play out, but this team being smarter and bigger should impact those things. So if you start talking about, and one of the things I'm really interested in looking at is like, how does this team get like 4 or 5 points better? Because offensively, they were prolific. It was one of the most it was one of the highest scoring Ohio State teams that we've seen. This actually, I didn't realize this, but Ohio State scored 78.8 points per game last year. That's the most Ohio State's ever scored in a single season since 91-92. But it sure didn't feel like that, did it? This team wasn't incredibly efficient offensively, and it lost a bunch of really close games despite that offense, despite those numbers, because it was not good enough in the margins to make that matter. Ohio State didn't assist very well, and that's the next talking point here from Diebler. The assist rate was far too low, and that also contributed to the lack of offensive flow that we saw and the lack of offensive efficiency at times. The common theme in all of these areas that were highlighted: experience, basketball IQ, and then essentially size. So the last kind of point in this, there's I thought 2 or 3 really good quotes here from Diebler that were really interesting to me, and that's what I end the story with. But he said, so Ohio State finished 50th nationally in adjusted defensive efficiency, 13th in the Big Ten, 73.5 points per game allowed. And Diebler said, for us to have the defense we had last year and be so poor at fouling and rebounding, it says what we were doing wasn't broken. We didn't finish possessions as well as we needed to. It's been a huge theme for us. And he said, when you look at the end of the season, by all accounts, we're one right game away of playing in the NCAA tournament. Those margins, that's the difference. We really have tried to attack those. So there's a lot of numbers to throw at you. It probably makes a lot more sense to just look at the story. So I'd encourage you to go to dispatch.com and find that story. Here are the 3 areas where Jake Diebler said this team needs to improve in order to make the tournament. I thought it was a really insightful 3-4 minutes of that press conference. And there was a lot of stuff. I mean, we talked about team versatility. We talked about what he learned about himself as a coach compared to the year before, what Ohio State needs to do to get back. Tayson Chapman, can Christoph Tilley defend? Like, Big Ten sketch. Like, we covered a lot of ground. There's a lot more to get into here, but those were atop the list of things that I thought were most immediately meaningful, most immediately worth like having a conversation about. There's a lot of stuff to come. So just make sure you're visiting dispatch.com on the regular and following the social media channels, because I'll keep pumping out content here as we move closer and closer to the start of the season. 2 quick other things to just throw out here. One, I did mention in the last podcast that Puff Johnson is not in Ohio State's official student directory any longer. He was when the semester started, but my understanding is that doesn't mean there's a 0% chance of him playing at Ohio State this year. And I don't believe time frame to be a major issue there. Like, I think if he were to get approval from the NCAA and that came in November, you could still see him play at Ohio State this year. I mean, you got to figure out certainly the academic component of all that, and can you? I don't have a clear idea yet. Like, if that were to happen, when he could be available, like, we might be far enough along in the calendar that, like, it would have to be after the semester ends. Like, I don't know, and I don't know that anybody honestly knows at this point, but it's more than a 0% chance. I don't know how much more, but more than a 0% chance that he does ultimately end up getting a waiver to play at Ohio State this year. Could, like I said, could be an option, and would certainly add to the depth that they would have on the wing, give them an experienced veteran backup behind Devin Royal. We'll see. So just wanted to throw that out there as we continue to figure out what that situation looks like. And then the last thing, and this was worth hanging around for, Red Panda Acrobats coming back, y'all. Nasty fall. It was assumed her career would be over, but that is not the case. We will see her again at games. When you see her, give her the applause that she deserves. I cannot wait to hear that music again, and can't wait to see her back there up on the unicycle. It's going to be amazing. Shout out to the GOAT. So now I'm going to wrap this one up so I can get to all these stories I got to write. As always, you can send along your questions, your comments, your love notes, your hate mail, and otherwise constructive criticism to me at Adam Jardy on Twitter or ajardy@dispatch.com. Thank you again for listening. Thanks to Scott Kirk for handling all the starts and stops in this episode while I had to go take care of the dog. I'll be back with you next week, probably a multiple podcast week again as we get ready for Big Ten Media Day. So stay tuned. Until we speak again, be kind, take care, and we'll talk soon.